good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you all on the call. Thank you very much indeed for your interest and for taking the time to come along and hear a little bit more about the role. It really is lovely to see you all. I'm Nick. I'm the Chief Executive and Registrar, and I have been now for just over 5 years. And it really has been a pleasure and a privilege to do the job that I do. I love working at the GCC. I love working with my colleagues, and I think we enjoy a really good relationship with the council. It's a positive working environment, and I think we like to think that we do a decent job and we make an impact, and we in doing so we try to develop and improve and enjoy our work. So that's the kind of starting point. That's the kind of environment we think we try and create, and that's one that you would be coming into if you were successful. I'm very conscious that sitting here it's not quite an ivory tower, but it's a very different environment from the one that you occupy. Very conscious that my world is different to yours. I don't profess to have ever worked in health and care in a frontline environment. I'm certainly not a chiropractor. If anything, I'm a kind of a regulator stroke bureaucrat. That's not to diminish the work that I do, but it's just to indicate that it's a kind of a different world that I occupy. And I suppose one of the reasons why we wanted to put this on was to kind of bridge the gap between our respective worlds. I recognise that as a registered chiropractor and a registered health and care worker, that it might seem a long way from your day-to-day experiences being a council member. What does the council do? What does a council member do? What does it involve? All of those things. And why does it matter? And I suppose that's where I wanted to start, really, in saying that what being a council member involves is being involved in governance, the governance of an organisation. That sounds a bit dry, but think about it from this perspective. So you're sitting there today, having once been on the board of the post office and the company that ran the post office counters and the postmasters and postmistresses up and down the land, sorry. And the process is playing out before your very eyes, how X number of years ago, a system was allowed to flourish that prosecuted innocent people. I think that's been shown now to have been the case. The inquiry hasn't yet run its course, and there'll be more on that. But in essence, I think we can point to a failure of governance at the post office. So there was perhaps things going on like a lack of scrutiny of the executive, a lack of curiosity about what was going on at various senior levels and at the front line. There wasn't sufficient work going on or sufficient attention being paid to upholding the reputation of the organisation. Certainly not enough work going on in terms of identifying risks. And that's just some observations from the top of my head in terms of what governance failure looks like. I certainly don't think we're close to that. And indeed, one of the things that well-functioning boards will do is to renew itself, is to ensure that the terms of office are limited and that new people come in and ask different questions and to shine a light on other areas. So if there's a backdrop to all of this, that's the one I offer you. Great. So that's who I am. What I wanted to cover today was I want to just spend a few minutes talking about regulation. I do so not just because I'm a regulatory bore, but because the GCC is fundamentally a regulatory body. So in order to understand the role of the governing body of that regulator. Just wanted to cover off a few things in terms of what we're for. Then I wanted to talk about what the GCC does, our role, our vision, mission, values, and functions. I want to talk about our current strategy. So again, you get an idea of what we're about, and then to cover the kind of process involved, the kind of role, the responsibilities, and how we're going to manage the next few months in terms of moving from where we are now to where we want to be, which is essentially appointing a new member of council, a registrant member of council, to enable that individual to attend their first meeting of the council and the council's third meeting of the year in September later this year. Hope that sounds like a plan. So firstly, regulation. You can kind of see the slide there. Essentially, though, regulation is about rules. Fundamentally, we set the rules of engagement, the standards, and as some of you will know, we're just about starting off a process to renew the rules of engagement. We set those out in the Code of Practice and Proficiency, and they are kind of established the as well as the expectations, the principles, the guidelines, all the supporting infrastructure, so you know what standards you're expected to achieve, and then what will happen if those standards are not met. They're in place not because we're busybodies or that we are obsessive rule makers and things like that. They're intended to protect and benefit people. That includes you as registrants, but essentially for the members of the public. Also to protect businesses and the environment, and to support economic growth. So when we're thinking about rules setting, we have to take into account all of those things. They're everywhere, aren't they, in our lives now, in education, healthcare, charities, transport, environment, communications, the media, utilities, everywhere where we look. The state has established regulation as a way of ensuring protection, rightly or wrongly, effectively or not. It's a feature of our modern lives. And regulators often use incentives and penalties to affect the change that they want to see in order to fulfill those protection duties. And I think regulators adopt different tones and different styles. Often that's prescribed in legislation about how they work. But there are some choices for regulators to set themselves out as perhaps slightly more on the educational side rather than being on the sort of policing side. They're mainly independent of government, independent of the government of the day. That, I think, is to ensure against too much interference, and so they kind of remain unencumbered by the whims of elected officials, and they can maintain a longer term approach. And I think that sort of relationship is being tested at the moment. I think there is a view from some in government, perhaps driven by the post office debacle, that there's perhaps too much independence from government, where government is kind of responsible. But I think it suits government for bodies like us and other regulators to be slightly at arm's length. I think regulation has a kind of a checkered reputation and a checkered history. I think it's sometimes has a bad reputation in terms of the costs that it applies to regulated businesses. but I think on the whole, perceptions are changing. I think those who are regulated, on the whole, kind of appreciate the protection that affords. But of course, regulators like us, and we do spend quite a lot of time thinking about how we do things and our approach and so on. We've got to carry out our work smartly, proportionately, and carefully, such that we can hold businesses and individuals to account on critical issues. And we want to try and not get in the way, to step out of the way, to enable and encourage innovation. So that's the kind of theoretical background, if you like. Apologies if that was teaching you how to suck eggs. So just narrowing down a little bit then on professional regulation. We are one of a large family, if you like, of health and care professional regulators. That includes the biggest, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, General Medical Council for doctors. I'm going down in order. Health and Care Professions Council, which is a multi-profession regulator, and you can see the others on the list. And then we've got another, which is the Professional Standards Authority for Health and Social Care. That's a UBA regulator, so that's the oversight regulator of all of us. So the Professional Standards Authority ensures, amongst other things, that we're doing our job well. So they carry out performance reviews of our performance on an annual basis, and they also, interestingly, oversee the recruitment process. So we have to clear our approach with the PSA, as they're called, as to when and how we carry out our recruitment exercises for council members. We have to issue an application before we start. They comment on that, and then they will insist on us appointing an independent person to sit on the panel to ensure fair play, and ensure fundamentally the PSA's objective here, which is to ensure a meritorious and fair process. So that's an interesting feature of our own recruitment arrangements. So narrowing down a little bit then on the GCC, we have a vision to be a respected regulator of a trusted profession. We have a mission. You can read that on the slide. And we have some values which kind of underpin the approach we like to take, both at a staff level and at a council level, and indeed all of our other committees, which is around togetherness, achievement, accountability. So those things are important, again, to understand that that's the sort of that's the framework of the organisation that you would be joining. And as a council member, you will be directly involved in refreshing the vision, refreshing the mission, agreeing the strategy, developing the strategy, and indeed, where necessary, changing those values to reflect the sort of direction of travel that the council should be going in. So our mission, fundamentally, to safeguard people who use chiropractic by setting and upholding standards for the profession. Fundamentally, that's what regulators do. I just want to emphasize that. We set the standards. And we deliver that by our core functions. So setting the standards of chiropractic education, conduct and practice. We recognise degree programs that achieve those standards. We maintain the register of individuals who meet our requirements in respect of character, health, competence, and CPD. And of course, probably best known for investigating and determining all complainants against our registrants. So here we are. This slide fundamentally sets out what we do. We're independent. It's a statutory body. We work against the Chiropractors Act 1994. We've got a responsibility to develop as well as regulate the chiropractic profession. We protect the health and safety of the public, and we set the highest standards in the code of practices we've already covered. And we investigate if standards aren't met, and we can remove a chiropractor from our register. Chiropractor as a title is protected by law, and it's criminal for anyone to describe themselves as a chiropractor without being registered with the GCC. So before registration, we check that people are qualified and fit to practice. We set those education standards and we approve and monitor programs. And fundamentally, through all of those activities, we help to support and raise public confidence in the profession and its place within the wider health and social care system. So one slide there that really does set out what the GCC do. Here's our strategy. Current strategy. Our focus is to place patients and their care at the centre of our work. We want to promote continuing chiropractic best practice, professionalism and value within the health and care system. We want to regulate effectively, efficiently, innovatively and inclusively. And we want to do our job better in the future. So enhance the nature and form of regulation for the profession of the future. So the process, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for a member of council. That member of council has to be a registrant, and they have to remain as a registrant through their the length of the term. The moment they come off the register is the moment they can't be a council member anymore. I wanted to just cover off briefly what does a council member have to do? Well, it's in the information pack that hopefully you've seen, and in short, there are three main responsibilities. So the first is to deliver the statutory purpose of the GCC. By ensuring that we've got good arrangements to protect the public. We set the strategic direction of the GCC. The council review, as a council member, you review the policies of the GCC. You've got measures in place to see that we're doing our job properly. You look to the future, you anticipate developments and so on. So all of that's, you've got to make sure the money's in the bank. You've got to make sure we're looking after the money carefully. And you've got to ensure good governance. So make sure we follow the code of conduct. We take collective responsibility for decisions. We look at our own performance. And that you've got objective ways in which you can measure the performance of the chair and other council members together. So those things are set out on page 14 and 15 of the pack, and I can't stress enough how important it is that you kind of understand that. That's going to be your marching orders upon your appointment date. The skills and experience you're going to need to demonstrate that are then set out on the next few pages. So I really did want to emphasize that the basis for recruiting the best person for the job is based on the extent to which you as an applicant are able to demonstrate your performance against those competencies that we set out. So there are 6 of those. You will need to address each of those in your application because that's the basis on which we will, the panel will identify the candidates, a short list of those candidates, then an interview list for those candidates, and then finally to arrive at a final recommendation to who's going to be appointed. And all of that process will be undertaken objectively and as fairly as it possibly can be, and assessments will be made against those competencies, nothing more and nothing less. Okay. So we've opened the process. Today's the date for the Meet the Registrar event. Got another week or so to submit final applications. And then what happens is the panel and the identity of the panel is set out in the pack. But just to stress, it also includes an independent member who's not connected to the GCC, who will oversee the whole process from start to finish and ensure fair process. Then interviews. Then we will give the shortlisted candidates plenty of time. We'll let them know by the 24th of May. We'll let them know whether or not they've been selected for interview. Interview will probably be 5 people in the frame, as it were, and then there'll be on the day, probably, there will be a selection of the candidate. Now, this is where it differs from the rest of the world, in that what we're required to do is to then set out, I'll go back to the PSA's oversight of the process. They expect us to write to the Privy Council. Privy Council is kind of an ancient office of the state, which essentially ensures that there's a place where, because we're independent of government, we report to Parliament. It's the place where organisations like us get its marching orders. So if things go terribly wrong with the General Chiropractic Council, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, whoever it is, let's depersonalize it from any of us. It's the Privy Council who has the right to step in and to say, these people who run this organisation aren't up to it. We'll find some people who are. So we have to put our preferred candidates up to the Privy Council, and then the Privy Council will take advice from the Professional Standards Authority about whether or not the process has been fair and equitable. So it's another step of the process. And the reason why I emphasize that is it'll take a few weeks for that process to happen, and therefore it adds another layer of complexity to the process. Don't let that put you off. It's just a step that we've now become a bit used to, that we have to go through. And then we've allowed for a month or so for that process to have gone through, such that we then issue basically a letter. It's the Privy Council who would issue you with a letter of appointment, and we're expecting that to take place from the 1st of August. And again, plenty of time to do some induction to enable you to start properly in your first council meeting on the 25th of September. So what does it involve? 4 meetings a year. Twice of those, 2 of those are in person, and those ones are also 2-day meetings. That's an opportunity for the council to meet on one day, and then on the second day to have training development for the council to get together, and so on. And as I say, those are 2-day meetings, one in June and one in December. The other ones in March and September are virtual and also 1-day long meetings. So you sit on the council. So that's how many days is that? That's 4, 5, 6 days in total, isn't it? Then you'd sit on at least one committee, and committees tend to meet 3 times a year. So that's another 3 days. We'll send out the papers for all of those meetings, and you're expected to read those. Those papers are a bit of a mix of performance reporting, how well is the GCC doing, but also thinking about the impact the GCC wants to have and the strategy it needs to have. So those meetings, I would say, are are wide-ranging, interesting, and quite challenging. We offer an annual fee, which is paid monthly. You don't obtain worker status, and you're not an employee. That's the sort of the kind of basis of the arrangement with us. And we carry out, as I mentioned before, we carry out from the appointment to the date of the first meeting, we'd carry out a fairly thorough induction process, so you know what you're involved with. And then there's an annual appraisal with the chair of council. So that's to give you some feedback and also to provide the opportunity to discuss how things are going. Just a quick word on your kind of status as a council member. The question there is, who do you represent? And the short answer is, you don't represent anyone. You're not acting for anyone. You're appointed. You can only be a registered chiropractor to be appointed. So as long as you're registered, then the next question is, do you meet the competencies required of the post? And I've already belaboured that situation enough, perhaps, but just to emphasise this bit, we're required to have registrants on the council, also on committees. We don't do it because we're required to. We do it because it makes for decision making that takes into account matters from a registrant's perspective. In other words, it improves decision making. As I say, you've got to be registered with the GCC. Membership of a representative body, one of the associations or the Royal College or whatever, is neither required nor expected, and we don't ask. It doesn't form part of any of the decision-making process. And by being a council member, you're not a representative of constituency in any way, nor should you or can you be. You've got your responsibilities are to the council, to the General Chiropractic Council, to ensure that we meet the statutory duties incumbent upon us, as must all council members do, as must I do as a registrar. I have a statutory position and I have to ensure that that's fulfilled, and the council has to ensure that I fulfil that statutory function. Now, the great thing about being on the council is the debate, the discussion, the decisions that you take. Those are, in my time, those discussions have taken place very diligently, very carefully, and you know, whatever decision is made, the right decision is taken. That's usually done without the necessity of a vote. In other words, it's kind of a consensus, and those who are uncomfortable with that are enabled to speak again to ensure that their point of view comes across. If necessary, though, a vote would be held. So that's just a little bit of extra perspective. That's come up a bit more recently in terms of the recent discussion we've been having on the code. So I thought I'd cover that. So there we are. Well done for listening to that. Hopefully that was reasonably efficient, as I committed to be. Now, of course, opportunity to open it up back to Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for that. So let's start with where are the meetings held? Just because that's the one that's top of my list. So Sue has asked that. So thank you, Sue.
So 2 of the meetings are held in your home because they're virtual meetings. So that's the March meeting of council and the September meeting of council. And then the others are held at the GCC offices in London. In the GCC, and indeed in previous organisations I've been involved with of a similar nature, we've toyed with the idea of taking a roadshow out into the country and so on. The logistical challenges are so difficult that we've kind of it's easier and more straightforward for people to come to London than it is for us all to go somewhere else. But I think for the foreseeable future, those meetings will be held in London. Of course, full expenses, overnight stays, travel costs, etc., meals and so on, they're all covered within the expenses arrangements. Okay, before that, I should cover the committee meetings. I didn't cover that sufficiently. So each of the committees has adopted a pretty similar arrangement now, which is of the 3 meetings a year, 2 will be virtual and 1 will be in person. And that would probably be a kind of full day meeting to take advantage of that. So that would include lunch, and that I think that kind of that face-to-face engagement enables relationships to be built to enable the online meetings to be as effective as they can be. I think we've certainly found that in the office that we've adopted a hybrid working now. I think that only works well because we're also seeing each other on a frequent basis. I should offer a health warning on all of that, which is that nothing's set in stone, is it, in regard to that? It may well be that, there's a sort of a general trend towards more in-person arrangements, but I think for the foreseeable future, that seems to be the preference of the current members of council. I think it works quite well, and I think it's a preferred model by most of the council members.
So we've got a couple of questions about the interview itself. One asking, what if we can't make the interview date?
I'm afraid to say that's really, really problematic. One of the things I've been heavily involved in these processes now for some years, and the hardest bit is to get the panel together. Believe it or not, it's to find a day when all the panel are free. It's a whole day to do that. So I'm afraid it's probably going to be really, really difficult. That said, nothing is out of the question, and it could we can adopt some sort of flexible arrangement to try and enable that. But I really have to be as clear as I can be. That's why we established the interview date at the outset of the process.
So the next question around interviews is how much notice is given for the subject for the presentation at interview?
Yeah, so we've enabled a bit of a gap between the shortlist and the interview date to enable that preparation, and at least 4 weeks. So the presentation topic will be relatively general. It will be about something around, and it will be the panel who determines this, not me. It'll be something around, what do you see as the challenges for the GCC over the next period, and how will your skills and experiences help with that? So it will be reasonably generic and general, and it really is. And the interview, I must stress this, the interview and the presentation is not a way of catching you out. It's to show you off to your best. That's what the panel want to do. I can't emphasize that enough. The panel want to enable and create an environment where you're at your best. It's not to be intimidating or to be a ghastly experience. I've had some feedback from candidates who've told me that they've quite enjoyed it, and they felt as though they had the opportunity to, kind of show themselves off, warts and all. I think we interviews are best approached where you're kind of interviewing the panel as much as the panel are interviewing you. So please don't be intimidated by it. As I was saying at the beginning, all the jobs I've ever got in my career have been through a sort of competitive process, and I kind of become immune to the competency-based systems and interviews and all of that. You just get used to it. I'm very conscious that that's not been your experience on the whole, I imagine. So part of my kind of purpose of being here today is to demystify some of that, and for it not to be seen as something that's to be got through, but to see it as an opportunity.
And could you speak a little bit more on the format of the interview? So, as you say, I think there are 5 people on the panel, aren't there? But can you explain a little bit more about how that format will work?
Indeed. So one of the members of the panel is the chair of the GCC, Jonathan McShane, and Jonathan will also be the chair of the interview panel. It does have a formality. Interviews do, don't they? Equally, it's friendly, so you'll be asked to arrive a little bit early. You'll be taken into the room. There will be a desk in the room, and the panel will sit on one side, and you will sit on the other. The chair will outline the format of the interview, and the format will follow. Essentially, please, could you give your presentation, which will probably be about 5 minutes, and the panel will be looking for, the areas of interest, things which they think will be important. They will look for evidence that you've kind of understood the role, you've understood what the GCC do, etc. And they will then lead on to, they will then ask you a set of questions which they will ask to all the candidates. And again, I'll stress, those questions will be competency based. Okay, so the competencies are set out in the pack, and you'll be asked to give examples of how you give me an example of how you've dealt with difficult colleagues, for example. What was it that you did that that meant that situation was overcome? So that's an example of a sort of competency-based question. It will be on not what your opinions are, not what you think, but how you've dealt with a particular issue in the past. And you'll be asked to give some examples of that. And that's, again, that might be beyond your, recent experience, but you will get that advice again if you are called, if you're called for interview. The letter will set out the format of the interview and the sort of focus, and then there'll be an opportunity for you at the end to ask questions, and that's a genuine open opportunity, again, for you to be clear as to what the role is, and your anything that's perhaps cropped up as part of your preparation for the interview, or was cropped up during the interview itself. So and then you'll be asked to go, and it will take about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that. If it's gone on for 2 hours, I suggest it's not gone very well. But I don't think that will be the case. And you shouldn't draw any conclusions from the fact that it's perhaps briefer than that. It's maybe that you're so on it and so clear that the panel haven't got any follow-up questions, and all is well. So yeah, that's the process. And as I say, there's this awkward bit afterwards, in that you're not going to get a phone call the next day to say that you've been appointed. There is a period of up to of some weeks before we're able to communicate to you that you've been successful.
Thank you so much, Nick. So now we've got some questions around the structure of council and the structure of the committee. So the first one is, how many members of council are there in a council meeting? Which I guess is how many members of council are there, full stop, really, isn't it?
That's right. There's 12 members of council currently. We have powers to have up to 14. And right now, the council has determined that 12 is about the right number to ensure that the committees are populated, and our functions are deployed, and it makes for an effective group, if you like. We put a lot of emphasis on the previous chair, and the current chair puts a lot of emphasis on the collegiality of the council, and the importance of it being a team, and each member having an equal voice, and for having enough space for those voices to be heard. So we think that 12 is about right, and that's an equal split between registrants and lay members of council. So just to be clear, a lay member is essentially someone who is not a registrant, and they together we fulfil all the kind of requirements of the council, and we've got sufficient skills, experience to cover the bases. So things like financial, regulation, people, chiropractic, of course. Within chiropractic, you've got things like education lists, you know, people who run clinics, people who represent, you know, various, not represent, but cover the various aspects of what a board needs, and a board works hard to ensure, you know, through its skills audit, that it's got the bases covered. And the other thing we need to ensure is that we've got a member for each of the countries, the devolved nations. So interestingly, not one for England, but one for Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So we've got those covered at the moment. So there isn't a particular geographical requirement right now for such a member. Was there another bit, Andrew?
Yes, there's a couple more questions more around committees. So how does the content within a committee meeting differ to a standard council meeting? And then another question around committees is how are people assigned to a committee? Is that something that's given to you, or is it something that you can express an interest in, or how does that work? What's that process?
Good questions. So the committees report to council. So in every council meeting, there's a bit on the agenda that says report back from one of the 3 committees that report to council. So the GCC has more committees than the 3. So I'll just run through them briefly. So in terms of the statutory committees of the GCC, there is the Education Committee, which reports to council. And then the Professional Conduct Committee, and the Investigating Committee, and the Health Committee. So those last 3, Professional Conduct Committee, Health Committee, which has never met in my time, and the Investigating Committee, they are statutory committees which don't report to council on a regular basis, and their membership is made up of regulatory committee members, and they carry out the fitness to practice work, and that is not reported. Those committees will come to council and present their report on an annual basis, and they will say things like, this year we had 12 professional conduct committee meetings, we considered sanctions on 4 of those cases, and so on, and that's backed up by a written report. So that's kind of semi-detached from council. What's more important are the other committees. So Education Committee I've mentioned, that's also a statutory committee, but it's of a different order to those fitness to practice committees. And the Education Committee has a statutory duty to approve educational programs and to monitor those educational programs. And that committee, well, as all of the committees do, have members who aren't council members on those committees. So they'll be supplemented by others, but they will all have council members on them. And then the other 2 are the Audit and Risk Committee and the Remuneration and HR Committee. So the Audit and Risk Committee, there's a clue in the name, they will audit the performance of the organisation, particularly the financial performance, and they will set, in conjunction with council, they'll advise council on the key strategic risks that the GCC carries, and they'll want to be assured of the performance against those strategic risks, particularly through the management of the operational risks, which I, as the chief executive, have oversight for at an executive level. So we will discuss and manage and mitigate all of those risks, and we'll report on those to Audit and Risk Committee, and the Audit and Risk Committee will scrutinise those in a very friendly way, nonetheless a rigorous way, to ensure that those risks are being appropriately mitigated. And then once a year, it will spend some time looking at the management accounts and the annual accounts of the GCC to ensure that we're solvent and our financial risks are being managed just like all our other risks. And then the Remuneration and HR Committee will set the salary framework for the GCC. It will agree any annual cost of living award. It will agree and set the remuneration levels for council and committee members. And it will also receive a report from me on any kind of staffing concerns, issues, policies, all of those kind of things, because the GCC fulfills the employer function. You would be the employer. So that's an important committee. So just to clarify, 3 main committees of council: education, audit and risk, and remuneration and HR committee. It's a bit kind of the choreography of who sits on what is a little bit tricky, in that there's already an established committee, and if it's full, then we wouldn't want to take someone off and put a new member on. So it depends a little bit on turnover and vacancies and all of that sort of thing. But what the chair would want to do is to discuss your interests and try and ensure that we've got the right people on the right committees, taking into account preferences, but also taking into account competencies and requirements and things like that. There's not a scientific method, but it kind of works.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nick. Right, we've got about 8 minutes left. I've got a couple more questions here, but if there's anybody who's still got a burning question, please either type it into the chat or put your hand up. But the next questions come from Sarah, wanting to know how much additional time is required for preparation, etc., around the day stated. So yeah, time for reading and prepping, I guess.
Good question, Sarah. It varies according to committees and so on. I think people on the education committee love being on the education committee, but they enjoy or endure, depending on how you look at it, quite a big paper set every few months, and that will obviously take a bit longer to read through. I'd say for council meetings, you probably get a day's worth of stuff to read. If you're going to do it properly, you can skim it in an hour, but in terms of being properly prepared for the meeting, you're going to need to commit a bit of time. And as you get more experienced and as you see what sort of stuff comes across your path, then I think that sort of reduces the time down. I think the pack says about 12 days. So that's probably about right in terms of, if you add up the sort of meetings and the reading time, that probably comes to that sort of number. That said, the papers are fantastically interesting, and the time will fly by as you read them.
And if you're interested in reading some of the papers from previous meetings, they are all on the website in the council section. You can actually get a feel for the papers from, for instance, we had a meeting back in March, and you can see all the papers there and the agenda and everything there. The question from Sue: if you're appointed to the council, how is it for a set term? How long? Reappointment? Those sorts of questions about the position and how long it lasts for.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Sue. But 4 years essentially is the term of appointment. Now, it's been brought to my attention that the pack has got 2 figures there, 3 years and 4 years. Apologies for that. For the avoidance of doubt, it's 4 years. Now, what happens is that we have to be very clear that the term is for 4 years. That said, there are powers to reappoint. That is not automatic, and the PSA, amongst others, and in terms of good governance, you have to review that. At the moment, we have got a process going on where members who are reaching the end of their term have been invited. So the council decides whether or not for future or upcoming appointments which are coming to the end of their term, whether to favour an open recruitment process or to consider reappointing members. And it's to consider reappointing members because it might be that a member has had enough and they decide that 4 years is enough, thank you very much, and we'll go do other things. Equally, it may be that a member's really contributed well, enjoys it and wants to seek reappointment, and there's a process to follow, and it's similar to an interview process for open recruitment, but that would enable a member to be reappointed on a term to be agreed. So just because you've had one 4-year term doesn't mean to say, and it may be just to enable succession and smooth out people, a lot of people leaving at the same time, which is undesirable, that you would have slightly different terms. So that would be a decision for the chair, probably in conjunction with me, to provide some advice as to, smoothing that succession path. I really commend you for your interest. It's a really interesting opportunity, and also it's what I would call a development opportunity. You would grow significantly as a result of your involvement. I've been a non-executive director of a number of organisations. I am currently of a mental health charity here in North London, and I've done that pretty much most of my sort of grown-up career, and it's great to be on the other side, as it were. That's really helped me do my current job, and I think it will give you a breadth and an additional experience to enable you to do your current job even better than you do. So I think it's a really nice way of fulfilling some of our development of the profession responsibilities, because it all kind of feeds back into a better whole, WHOLE, as it were.
Yeah, so having reviewed through the questions asked in advance, I think, or I hope that you've covered them all off. If there are any further questions, so we'll be sending round the video and another link to the pack just to remind you of where it is, so it's all in one place for you in the next couple of days. And so if there are any further questions, by all means, reply to that, ask them. I'm sure Nick will be happy to answer those. But as we come to 6 o'clock on the dot, I think let's not hold things out any more than we need to. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Really appreciate you taking the time. And as Nick said at the outset, we do appreciate that trying to find time within your busy schedules is not always easy. And yes, thank you very much. I will now bring the event to a close.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.